Let's analyze what happens to the human being in those moments of lust, how the brain is affected. So let's say somebody suffers a moment of weakness, they're in that lustful state. In that state of heightened arousal, the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain behind the forehead, actually shuts down or becomes very less active. So scientists have done biological studies of this state where in this state of arousal the blood flow actually travels from the brain area and into the pelvic region. So the more all that energy is going into the private parts, and that's why the intellect diminishes and the private parts, which are the responsible for that instinctive impulsive behavior, and especially during that dopamine rush, everything else falls on the wayside in terms of any fear of consequences, the decision logical rational mind. Many people around the world do get affected by lust. It's a very common human condition. And the question is, have you ever been affected by lust in such a way where it's ended up having consequences for you? You've lost a relationship, you've lost your job, or any other severe consequence that has been caused by the lust that had happened in that moment of weakness. Many people think lust is about being addicted to pleasure. This is one of the most commonly misunderstood concepts about lust. Lust is about being addicted to escapism, escaping yourself from something. And what is it that you're escaping from? It could be a whole series of things. It could be stress, loneliness, it could be some other emotional issues, it could be an emptiness inside of you, it could be wanting to feel alive again, to escape boredom. So there's a whole series of things that people are trying to escape from when they pursue lust. Again, it boils down to the inner battles that we are fighting inside of us. This is what this whole series is about, for us to become aware, understand the inner battles, and then look at the solutions to overcome them and achieve that inner mastery. Many people think that lust is about physiological behavior, but really it's more about psychological. This is one of the things that we really need to try and understand, and what we are going to dissect today in this session now. So when we start peeling the layers of this topic of lust, we will find that in the core aspect of this matter is that inner silence, that inner vacuum that people are trying to fill. So as the ancient thinkers have said, when the mind goes silent, then the human being starts looking for illusions to fill the mind outside. They start looking for this escapism, this psychological anesthetic which they need to be able to fill that void inside of them. So modern day scientists are also talking about the same thing. So same concept, different era, different vocabulary, but the main aspect is it's escapism. They are trying to fill the void inside of them with lust. What lust brings in terms of, we talk about illumination in the mind or the illumination inside, and outside you have this physical sort of gratification which basically gives them the dopamine rush inside of them, and that's what they are trying to fill and escape from, the emptiness. Let's analyze what happens to the human being in those moments of lust, how the brain is affected. So let's say somebody suffers a moment of weakness, they're in that lustful state. In that state of heightened arousal, the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain behind the forehead, actually shuts down or becomes very less active. This is the part which has the discipline, which is the logical part of your thinking brain, that basically say it shuts down or reduces its activity, and you do no longer have that logical way of thinking. You no longer now regulate those emotions, and then the limbic part of the brain activates, the impulsive part. This is the one which craves those desires. This is the one where, as it states, impulsive, wants that dopamine sort of rush gratification, wants that reward now. It totally negates the sort of discipline of what is right, what is wrong. It doesn't care at that moment in time of the consequences of your actions. It doesn't care about your relationships. It doesn't care about your job or about your respect, your reputation, because now the desires have completely taken over. The brain is now flooded with dopamine. It wants to be able to fulfill that desire at that moment in time. And that's why you will see in society all the time that some of the most intelligent, some of the most spiritually grounded people, people who you thought were sensible, who were mature, professional, whatever opinion you have of them, you've elevated people and they fall from grace because in that moment of weakness, they've done the most stupid, impulsive thing which has had consequences. A marriage breaks up, they lose their job because they acted out their desires or took that impulsive action in that moment of weakness. And it's in that state of lust and heightened arousal, the logical thinking of the brain shuts down. Hence why you see the actions of these people who are normally very intelligent, but at that moment in time, they do something which is so foolish. So scientists have done biological studies of this state where in this state of arousal, the blood flow actually travels from the brain area and into the pelvic region. So the more all that energy is going into the private parts, and that's why the intellect diminishes and the private parts, which are the responsible for that instinctive, impulsive behavior, and especially during that dopamine rush, everything else falls on the wayside in terms of any fear of consequences, the decision, logical, rational mind to think between what is right, what is wrong. Hence why in that state, a lot of sexual crimes are committed. Because if you stood back and analyzed everything rationally, logically, you would not commit those crimes. But because of this state, heightened state of arousal and that feeling of lust at that moment in time, all consequences are out of the window and the rational, logical thinking of what is right, what is wrong, the moral compass is completely diminished and completely wiped out. And ancient thinkers have told us about this centuries ago. It's just that scientists now have done studies, even carried out scans of the brains in those states where they can show you how the brain actually changes, the composition of the brain's makeup changes in those different states. And whereas the ancient wise people have just said it in one sentence centuries ago, which encompasses all of this, that what the scientists have detailed, broken down, and given us in detailed explanation. What they've said is during the moment of desire, the intellect is blinded. One sentence completely describes all those scientific experiments and explanation. During the moment of desire, the intellect disappears or is blinded. It's absolutely amazing how these wise people from the past summed everything up in one sentence, just a few words. But modern day scientists need so much like data, neurological reports, just to illustrate the same point. Let's come back to real life examples now. Let's say a man or a woman working in a modern day stressful job. They've come home in the evening after having a very sort of busy, exhausting day. They feel unappreciated, they feel overworked, tired. And at night when they're sitting down, they feel, they want some sort of a stress relief. They start scrolling through their phone. Even if they're not actively looking for pornography, a lot of things online have subtle form of erotic images or pornography or have lustful images in them. So they start scrolling, they get a dopamine rush. Maybe after a while, that dopamine rush crashes. They feel that they've wasted time, they feel the regret. But what happens is that they actually repeat the whole process again, maybe the next day, simply because the inner void has not been full, has not been filled with what they've done with that activity of scrolling on the phone. That's why they need to be constantly repeating the same cycle. So it shows you that it's the inner self which is guiding these actions. Let me give you another story, again, read from historical text, where there was a teacher who wanted to test his pupil, his student, to see whether he has grown emotionally mature and disciplined enough to be able to be given more responsibilities. And you can't just rely on people by asking them whether they are ready yet or not. The teacher wants to test the person. So what he did with this particular student, he wanted to test him with temptation, temptation of lust and desire. And this is how he was going to judge whether the student is now ready to be taken to the next stage where he was to be given a certain position or responsibility. So what the teacher did, he actually sent a beautiful woman just to entrap him. So when the student was going in the marketplace, the woman appeared out of the blue to tempt him. The student was able to lower his gaze and not fall into that entrapment. When he walked further to another place, he turned around the corner, this woman appeared there again. And again, he was able to lower his gaze. Even though the woman was trying to tempt him, he did not fall into the trap. Then she tried to accost him in different places in the marketplace until he actually then fled from the scene in order to avoid this temptation, and he succeeded in the test. And that's when his teacher revealed himself and said, I had sent that temptation to test you and you have passed the test. The question is, how many of us would pass or fail such a test? We may be married, we may be in relationships, we may be religious people, we know the difference between right and wrong, but in that moment, when a temptation presents itself, how many people would be able to lower their gaze, walk away, and not fall into that trap, which many times people do because of external forces or inner conflict that they have. If they have that emptiness that which they're trying to fill, they will more than likely fall into that trap. I remember speaking to somebody, and they said that a very religious person, a very disciplined person, a mature person, he said that if you locked me in a room and you had £1,000,000 there, and you said to me, don't touch that money, it belongs to so and so, do not even take a penny from that. He said, even if you put £10,000,000 there, I will not touch that money. I would not be interested, it would not tempt me. However, in the same situation, if you were to lock me in a room with the most beautiful woman in the world and you said to me, don't speak to her, don't get tempted by her, would I then be able to give you that same certainty that I would not be able to fall into that trap or indulge in something which I may later regret? And he said, I cannot give you that guarantee, because that is something that I cannot guarantee you. So that shows you that temptation is inside of the person. Because let's say if you have that lustful temptation inside you, that emptiness that you're trying to fill, you will find avenues to fulfill those desires and those lustful temptations wherever you are, no matter what situation you're in. Whether you're married, you're not married, you're in a job or you're not in a job, you're rich or poor, wherever you go, you will find the opportunities to fulfill that desire, because that is a strong urge inside of you. It's like a rash. The more you scratch, the more you have an urge to scratch more. The more you know you're going to scratch this, The wound is going to be deepened. It's going to take longer to heal, but you feel that initial instant gratification. That's exactly with lust, that you feel that instant gratification. You know there may be consequences later, but at that moment in time, you don't care about the emotional wounds that you're going to create by scratching that rash at that moment in time, which is basically fulfilling that desire at that precise moment in time. This is what I explained earlier about how the logical part of the brain shuts down at that very point. So this is very important that we understand this. This is what we try to understand, is that your urges appear repeatedly because they live inside of you. Modern day scientists call this the dopamine pursuit loops. We're constantly pursuing the dopamine rush, that excitement that's happening inside of us. This is how millions, I say millions, of people are falling on a daily basis, many secretly without others knowing. They are crashing internally, whether it's through an affair or through a pornography addiction or some other temptation which is ruining their lives externally. It's happening, it's manifesting, it's externally, but all the problem stems from the internal conflict. This is where the enemy within is striking at them. And the sooner we realize this, the sooner we can deal with this problem. Let me give you a couple of examples between ancient wisdom and modern day scientific speak on the same subject of lust. The ancient wise people have said that when a man submits to lust, a certain darkness enters the heart. And neurologically, the scientists are saying the same thing. It's called a dopamine crash. It's called a mental fog. It's called emotional flatlining. These are the things that they are talking about in more detail, what the wise people have told us previously, centuries ago. What's the second one? One ancient wise person said that when a man or woman looks at something lustfully, then certain threads are weaved in their mind which brings them downwards. So when a person looks at something lustfully, then those threads are created in their mind which bring them downwards. Modern day psychologists and scientists call this compulsive behavior, neural pathways. So see how they are now describing exactly the same things what people in the past, the wise people in the past have said, but again in just a few words. There's one more. The final one is, when a person is ruled by desire, the heart becomes like a mirror covered in smoke. And what do the modern day scientists, psychologists say? This is when the mind becomes confused. Person becomes emotionally disconnected, and that's when their clarity disappears. See, exactly the same thing. The ancient wise people, modern day psychologists saying exactly the same thing. So these lessons are not new. They have been rooted in history and in wisdom, but many of us are still blinded by it, and we keep falling into the same traps. Just like modern day celebrities, without going into too much detail, many people know these stories, how somebody successful, respected in society, in the public eye, all of a sudden falls from grace. I'll give you a few names. Tiger Woods, a successful sportsman, very clean image, but behind the scenes, he was fighting his own battles, and that led to having multiple affairs. Despite having a beautiful wife at home, he was out having multiple affairs, and ultimately, people get caught. Bill Clinton, the former president of the USA, who was deemed at the time as one of the most, modern day best, articulate leaders, wise leaders of the modern era. I'm again subject to opinion. I disagree with that. But he was caught having an affair with an intern inside the White House. And who would do something so stupid like that while you're at work in one of the most sort of pivotal political roles in the whole world? You get caught in the prestigious Oval Office of the White House committing adultery. That's just one more example. Hugh Grant At the time, going out with Liz Hurley, who was a beautiful woman in her time in the 90s, what does he do? He gets caught with a prostitute. In that momentary lapse of judgment, a moment of weakness, he submitted to his desires, and look at the consequences. He was arrested. They took his mugshot in the police station and is plastered all over the media, and he became a subject of mockery and ridicule. It's at those moments where a person's logical brain, rational thinking disappears, as I've mentioned quite repeatedly. And these are just a very few examples, but this is a story that is repeated countless number of times across the whole of civilization, not only now, but in the past. And for the time remaining in terms of the future, this is going to be repeated again countless millions of times. As long as the human being is alive, the lustful desires will be awakened, will be alive inside of him or her. It's just that they need to know how to regulate them. And this is where we share the solutions with you. How do we ensure that we do not keep falling into these traps and ultimately sabotaging our lives, our careers, our families, our relationships, and we fight the urges? So I'm going to share a few things with you as a final part of this segment today, so you can take away and implement them in your life to ensure that you don't end up like Tiger Woods, Hugh Grant, or even Bill Clinton doing something so stupid at work. Let me leave with you a few solutions which will help you from falling into these, stop you from falling into these traps again and again, so you can break this cycle of behavior which may have led to such an addiction or these moments of weakness which cloud your judgment. Let's start with the first one. It all starts with the eyes. Lower your gaze. Stop your eyes from looking at these things in the first instance. So avoid exposing your eyes to these images, videos, or even when you're out and about and you're constantly ogling. So if you're a man, you're constantly ogling at women, you're looking at them, you're staring at them. What's it doing? It's stirring up the desire inside of you. Some of you may agree with this, may not agree with this, but I'm giving you a solution. Stop your eyes, stop violating your eyes, because the eyes are the window to the soul. If you keep corrupting them with these images, with these glances, unlawful glances, then you are corrupting the heart, which is the seat of these desires. And so avoid looking at these things in the first place. When you get an urge, keep fighting that urge. Do not look. So if you keep repeatedly fighting the urge and blocking yourself from looking at something which you shouldn't be, then you will find that you are rewiring your brain to be able to deal with things differently. Because what's happening now, something presents itself, you fall prey to that temptation, and you keep looking, you repeat that cycle again, it becomes a habit, and that habit leads to addictions. Addictions have consequences. So let's try and rewire the brain so you're not doing the same thing again and again. So this is lesson number one. Number two, control your thoughts. When a thought enters into your brain, change it straight away, instantly, to something positive. Because if you allow that thought to germinate, let's say it's like a seed. A seed gets planted from an external stimulation that, okay, this is something good, you should be looking at this, you should be doing this. By constantly thinking, it's like you're watering that seed in your brain, and that seed is going to pop open into a little stem. And from that stem, it's going to grow and grow until that becomes like a tree in your brain with such deep roots that it becomes part of your physiology, psychology, biology. That's why exterminate that seed as soon as it gets planted by thinking. How do you exterminate it? By changing that negative thought into a positive thought instantly. That will ensure the seed does not get an opportunity to stay there and germinate into a plant, into a tree with such deep roots that it becomes part of your character, personality. Cut the means to whatever it is that is leading you into that behavior. Maybe it's your mobile phone, maybe it's bad company. Cut the means. Again, it's easier said than done, but it requires effort, some element of striving on your part in order for you to be able to achieve that. You have to fight it. You, if your phone is the one thing that is causing you to fall into these constant traps, then change your phone. May get rid of the internet on the phone and go get a normal analog phone. If that's what it's going to take, then by all means you deserve to do this for your own sanity. Do not spend times in such company where you may fall into temptation, even if it means your own company in solitude. Don't spend times on your own in solitude if you are going to end up doing things that which you may later regret, or it causes these lustful temptations for you. And that's why it's even sometimes advisable not to spend time in the company of another person in solitude, which you know it will end up causing a problem later. That's why a lot of company bosses who spend time in solitude with their secretaries, or colleagues who spend time together, isolated from others, when there's just two of them, they end up falling into the traps of lustful behavior, may end up having an affair. So, what would have been best advised for them is that they do not spend that time together in isolation. They only work in an environment where there's other people around them so they don't fall into that temptation. And finally, these things happen because of this emptiness inside of us. We need to have a higher purpose. We need to have some great, bigger, grand goals which we are working towards. If you had a higher purpose, if you had something bigger than your desires that you're trying to achieve, then you would be spending every waking moment working towards that purpose. You would not have any time to sit there with this vacuum inside of you and you're trying to fill that with some sort of lustful activity to give you that escapism. The people who are pursuing worthwhile goals end up spending all their energy and time in pursuing those goals. Yes, successful people fall as well, but that's when they sort of lower their guard. So you have to be constantly watchful of your surroundings and ensure that you never ever trip, and you're always constantly monitoring your thoughts, you're monitoring your scenario, your environment around you, and you're also monitoring those desires. You're regulating yourself emotionally to ensure that you do not fall prey to these temptations. So, higher purpose, and also logically think about the consequences of such actions. If you fall prey to temptation and end up doing something which is basically lustful, it has consequences, as you have seen in the examples that I have given, that no action like this is free of consequences. So be on alert and watch how you go. This is how you're going to save yourself from this old enemy of the human being, this inner lust.